Hello, everybody. Once again, I am Liam Crafton Jr., aka Zorval Chan Less Than Guru. We have Mars Video Cat here, who is already being a little bit annoying. Um, yeah, you are. Yeah, you are. But the people like you. So, today is part two of my deep dive into the Palladium rewrite. And yes, the previous video, part one, was an hour and a half or so. When I did this all together and did it quickly, it was 2.5 hours. But I decided to break things up, and these still might be long, but I really want to do an in depth, deep dive into my rewrite of the Palladium First Edition, Palladium role playing game First Edition. That way, you can understand and see all the changes I've done, the reasoning why the changes, that I did those changes, and then you can determine if any of them are something that you might do or be inspired by things that I've brought in, where I brought them in, how I brought them in, and things like that. And you might decide at the end of all of this that this book is perfectly fine the way it is, along with the other supplements, and leave it that way. But hopefully, these videos will show you how you can make the game your own and how you can draw inspiration and rules from all different types of things, especially if they are a D&D based game. And when I say D&D based game, I don't even want to say D20, I want to say a D&D based game, whether it's old D&D, BX, BECME, AD&D, AD&D second edition, third edition, fourth edition, fifth edition, any offshoots whatsoever. All of those are easily brought into any of them. Any of them are very easily brought in, and part of this might show you how I've done it, and again, inspire you or make you think how you might be able to do it in your own game. Again, if I look over here, it's because that I have a second monitor set up. It's closer to me. My other one is farther away. The one far away is a big screen TV, but it's still easier for me to read off of the monitor that is closer to me. I have glasses, and I'm pretty blind without them. So the part one dealt mainly with species, and then I went over attributes and hit points, shock points, why I came up with shock points, and alignment. One of the things I did forget, and I'll cover that, and hopefully it won't expand part two very much, but for alignments, I did take out Palladium had like lists of things that an alignment was bound by, and to give an example, I actually got the the Palladium book here with me. Yesterday it was back on the bookshelf there, and I didn't want to just jump up and get it. But Palladium had these lists of things that could and could not. And certain things made sense, but other things again was that so strict can and can't do without any type of way to break those. So, one of these principled, I gave the example of they have it avoid lies, but always keeps his word. What if he decide? What if he gave his word under false circumstances? What if he gave his word thinking something and found out that he had been lied to? Certain things like that. So I kind of wanted to break those away and just kind of give the general attitude for the alignment, and then allow the motive to give an out, for lack of a better term. But that's basically what it is. So let's go ahead and let's get into occupations. Like I described in part one, I decided to call them occupations. Palladium, at least in first edition, has everything is an OCC, an occupational character class. Character class comes from the D&D character class. I just decided to call them occupations. I want them more of a, this is kind of your job or your skill set. This is what you do in life. So occupation, I didn't see a need of always O.C.C. or occupational character classes, etc. So that's just a another change of terms that doesn't, just a different word having the same definition. Um, so the first thing that they did in Palladium is they talk about experience points, and then they talk about experience levels, and then they have their chart of the occupational character classes and what requirements are needed for those. And then later on, next page, they before they get into skills, they talk about changing occupations. And so that's kind of what I want to go over today. I put it in a different order. I've never had a problem with the order of things in here. To me, it actually seemed intuitive, but it might have been because the way that I got into role playing games was mainly through Palladium games. Robotech was the first role playing game that I really liked. I had the BECME, the B and E part of BECME, the basic and expert sets, box sets. I had those. I dabbled with them, but I never really got into it. Robotech is what caught me, grabbed me, and I devoured that book, all the supplements, and then this was my next book. So the Palladium style was kind of intuitive to me after learning it. And then when they shifted orders in like Rift's Ultimate Edition and things like that, that's when it kind of was like, hey, this is weird. This is not intuitive for me. I'm sure if somebody started with those and then they went to these books, it would be the same way. Why am I saying this? I order things, have a different order because my players were having difficulty finding certain things. So I was trying to go as a step by step and get rules down before examples and to explain so that a person immediately would know if I want to do this, how do I do this? Instead of it being tacked on at the end, it would be tacked on at the beginning. So, occupations. The first thing is I kind of just explain how you change occupations because there is a lot of old school type thing where there were dual classing and multi-classing, which were kind of different. Multi-classing was usually what was in D&D for demi-humans, like elves and dwarves, where you could simultaneously be two occupations at the same time. So you would advance both at the same time. Your experience was kind of split, half going into this character class, the other half going into this character class. So you might raise things differently, but you were doing both at the same time. Humans, on the other hand, only could do what was known as dual classing, and that would be you go up a certain level in a character class, and then you would stop and you would start at another one and kind of go up there. It's somewhat similar to the modern, where you, as soon as you hit a level, you're like, oh, now I was 3 levels of fighter, now I want a level of cleric, but with more rules on how it wasn't just oh, I'm a new level, I decide to be this. It was you might have to seek training and do things like that. Palladium was based more on that. Palladium was more similar to the dual class system of D&D, but for all the different species, not only humans. But there are certain things in there that I didn't necessarily like, so I changed. So these are my rules for that. And I set it up because that is something that a lot of people kind of want to do at the start, or at least know how they will do that. And that's why I explain changing occupations before I even explain the occupations. So similarities and differences with Palladium. So in my rewrite, changing an occupation requires you to find somebody that will be able to teach you. And that is going to cause time and money for the training, as well as experience that you will need to be gained while being trained. That is intentional. And there are certain things that I hated when I was younger and now have learned more to appreciate or understand better. And in old school D&D, some of the some of those games, because there are so many of them, you would have to find that trainer, and I didn't like that. I just wanted to, if I want to change, let me change. I talked about Adventure Quest. They had if you were switching to a different background to learn something, you would have to spend time away. And I wanted to bring that old school feel back. The number three, the purpose of the game, that old school feel. If you switch, it's not just like in D&D 5th edition where you just go, okay, or 3rd edition Pathfinder, where you're just like, okay, I'm going to switch over. I got 3 levels of Mercenary Fighter, now I'm going to go into Wizard. You have to find somebody to be able to teach you. You're not just going to learn that wizardry on your own. So you're going to require to be find somebody who can introduce you to a new occupation. So that's kind of the first thing. And then you are going to need the minimum requirements. This was the thing that I really decided, and it was it was against my my likes and my knee jerk reaction. I do prefer the any species can be any character class, and I do have that for the most part. But I am even normally for the have a clumsy person be a thief. If you roll some bad attributes and you're clumsy, not have a good PP or anything, and you want to be a thief, fine. Just you're going to be a bad thief. But who am I to say that you can't? That's kind of my normal philosophy. But when I look at my players, my system, my purpose, the setting, the purpose of the game, I realize that I do want to have those restrictions, those requirements. So I pretty much left them how they were in here. This made me really have to let everybody at the table understand that it's not something to go, I want this species and this character class, and that's what I'm going to be. You decide your species. That's the most important thing to decide. Then you roll. Don't even think about, oh, I'm going to be a shifter, a changeling in Palladium First Edition, and that's going to have those attribute dice are really going to link up with being a warlock, and that way I'm going to be able to be a fire and probably maybe even a fire air warlock type thing. No, you pick your species, then you roll because you can roll bad, and I've seen my players' rolls, and yes, they have rolled quite poorly. More poor with a couple of people have rolling good stats, but for the majority, it's been average or poor. Um, but roll the stats and then look at those stats and see what you can be. So switch occupations, you are going to need to find a trainer. You are then going to need to meet the requirements for that occupation. So at least the requirements are there. So if you can't meet it, then you don't try to be it. And then the same as in here, you stop accruing experience points, and new experience points start accruing until you even become level 1. So you're kind of it's not officially a level 0, but it's like a level 0. You're learning the new occupation. If it is a mundane occupation, what I mean by mundane is I have a two-sided philosophy. Mundane is non-mystical. Mystical can be psychic, it can be magic, it can be divine, whatever. The things that create magic and prayers and spells, miracles, psychic powers, all of that is mystical. If it's a mundane, then you just need to get to what it would take you to get from level 1 to level 2. So if it takes 1,700 experience points to get from level 1 to 2, you're going to be at 0. You're not going to be level 1. You're going to need 1,700 experience. Those experience then go away, they disappear, but now you're level 1 in that new occupation. For mystic classes, you need to get to what would be equivalent of level 3. So level 3 is usually double what your level 1 is. So the level 1 was 1,700. Now we're looking at 3,400. Once you get 3,400, those experience points disappear. They're not used in any way, shape, or form. And then you are now a level 1 mystical occupation, say a wizard occupation. If you do some wizard levels and you decide to go back, well, now you kind of have to do some retraining. So you don't just start back, you still have to go back to that, getting that level. Say you went from a mercenary fighter to a wizard and you want to go back to mercenary fighter. Well, now you're going to have to do that level 1 experience. You don't necessarily go back to level 0 because you have some levels in that occupation, but you need to kind of reset your mind. So that is how the switching goes. Um, number 4, all training experience is lost when the character changes. Any occupation is frozen, so you don't lose those levels. The mercenary fighter, say they get to level 3, they're still going to know all their stuff at 3. They can still do all their stuff at 3. Unlike D&D, if they have that training in armor, they're not going to lose it, so they will still not be affected by armor as much as a wizard. So that gives an incentive to be switch occupations. And then there's no limit how many times where you can go besides what the requirements of those occupations are, the attribute requirements. There's a couple of things that I've changed specifically. Like they were things that were specifically stated were possible in this book that I did not like and took out. And one of them was gaining the D6 level or the D6 hit points every time you gain a new level. So somebody, it would take a lot longer to go from first level or say fifth level to sixth level than a person to go from first level to fourth level. So sometimes people would choose to, at say fourth or fifth level, they would choose to start over again at something else because they could get a bunch of levels in that other thing and get a bunch of hit points. So, as I said previously in part 1, I have shock points. Shock points, you have your hit points, which are based off of your physical endurance, and then the d6 you roll for your level, that is shock points. So, a first level character has a base shock points, and I say base, you'll find out why later, but they'll have a base shock points of a d6, 1 to 6. And then as they gain level 2, then they roll another d6 and add to that. If they switch occupations, they do not gain that extra shock points. Those shock points will only gain when their new occupation, or if they don't exceed that level, they go back to their previous occupation, but they need a occupation that is higher than their highest level. So, as an example, they're a third level mercenary fighter and they switch to wizard. And they go 1, 2, 3 at fourth level wizard, then they get a d6 added to their shock points. If they only go up to 3 and then they switch over to, say, be a priest and they go 1, 2, 3, they still have not got any additional shock points. Once they get the fourth level in anything or go back to the mercenary fighter and get the 4, but once they get 4 in some occupation, then that gives them the extra uh, d6 shock points. Why? Because they gain a lot of other stuff at first level. If they're mystical, they're going to learn some spells or some psychic abilities or something like that. If they are switching to a fighter, they're going to get some combat abilities, some tier levels for their armor to make it so that armor is easier to wear. They possibly could get some bonus shock points, which is something that I introduced. I'm sorry for that. Neighbors apparently honking at somebody. But that was something that I wanted. I wanted not to have everything always given to them. So shock points are based off of highest level, not per level. That is really annoying. So, sorry, losing my track. That was just a little, not a little, a lot annoying. Um, Skills are frozen. If the skill is repeated, it won't go higher on that first. Uh, say for example, mercenary fighter, you have prowl. So prowl, say you got that up to that level 3. Mars. I'm gonna have to start all over for you. No, Mars was on the keyboard. Very very upset little kitty. Okay, so just if something else messes up, I'll have to restart this. But right now, let's continue. Um, so, say you're a third level mercenary fighter, you have prowl. It's at a certain percentage. If you go to be a thief who has prowl, you're that fourth or that third level mercenary fighter is going to stay at that percentage. This, if it's a higher percentage, you're going to use the higher percentage. If you, for whatever reason, wouldn't take prowl, I think they automatically get it. But say you go to wizard and you don't take prowl, you're going to stay at that 3. But if you have something that gives you, or you take prowl again, once that gets to 4th level, then it'll go up. But either way, your bonus, if you get a bonus to prowl, that will affect everything, the new and the old, added to the base. Whichever base plus the bonus is higher, that's what you use. So say that you got up to 3rd level, and I'm just pulling numbers out, but say that you had a mercenary fighter, say you had 30%, and that's where you had gotten it to as a mercenary fighter. And when you get it at level 1 as it's a thief, say you have a 10%, but you have a 20% bonus, so that's 30. That's not higher than what you have as mercenary, so you can take that, say that 30% bonus, 20, 30, whatever percent bonus I just said, you can apply that to the skill, not the base 10%, but the bonus you could apply to the higher until that other one makes it higher or gets you at a higher percentage. So that's kind of how I have skills working. And multiple occupation, that's something that I explained, kind of like the multi-classing in old school D&D, where you would divide the experience points into 2 different things at the same time. I have it where it's not a player option, but it's a game master option. Um, it's something that I like to use as temptation for a player, like a hey, here's something. If you A good example would be, say, a deity or devil lord tempting somebody, hey, be a priest, be a witch of me, and I will give you extra power. And then instead of just you having to switch, part of that temptation, that deal that you as a game master presents to the player, then maybe you can split them. You can make it so that the experience that they gain is split, and they're simultaneously leveling two different occupations. But I did not want the players to quite have that type of thing going. So if there's something and they want to become a priest, they're going to stop what they're doing and need to stop what they're doing and then become a priest and freeze everything else. So that's just a little extra thing that Palladium doesn't offer, but I threw that in there as a possibility for the game master to do. So that's basically, I just wanted to put that at the beginning before I did occupations, because one of things that a lot of modern games do is some type of multi-classing. So I wanted to present that first. I do the same thing with magic points. Um, I don't use PPE. I'll explain magic points when I get to that section. But everything like ISP, PPE, stuff like that, I do it kind of the same way that I did the shock points, where you need to get at a higher level with that. And for magic points and ISP, you need to be something that is giving you magic points or ISP. If you're at a wizard in third level and you have third level magic points, if you go to become a mercenary fighter and get to fourth level, mercenary fighter doesn't give you anything per level magic point wise, so you wouldn't get it. You would have to be something else that gave magic points. So here's all my occupations. The main thing I want to talk about on this page is the split that I did. I did separate men of arms and rogues into two categories, and took a few out of the men of arms and put them in other places. And I'll kind of explain my reasoning for that. But Men of Arms, I have as the bounty hunter. That is from the Insloth Jungle. That's an occupation that when I read it, I don't see anything being terribly overpowered about it. It seems like a neat, interesting occupation. So I let that stay. The knight is straight from here. The long bowman is straight from here. The mercenary sailor is interesting to me. When I was going through things and bringing them in, I wanted to be able to bring in the sailor. And when I'm typing everything out and looking at skills and comparisons and stuff, the sailor and the mercenary fighter both had a requirement of PS of 7. Physical strength of 7 is what they needed. And when I started looking at skill choices and stuff, they were really, really similar. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized that the sailor was just basically a mercenary fighter on a boat. So I decided to just make it into one occupation, and then you choose, do I want to be a mercenary or do I want to be a soldier? And I just made it mercenary instead of calling it mercenary fighter, just dropped the fighter. I like sometimes condensing things, making them nice, short, compact. Again, occupation versus occupational character class, mercenary versus mercenary fighter, that type of thing. So basically, that is your occupation, and then you just choose, do I want to go the mercenary route or the sailor route? The soldier is pretty much straight from here, and the squire was an optional. And here it was an optional uh, occupational character class that I decided to actually just put in the men of arms, because my men of arms have certain bonuses that they all get, with maybe a couple of twists in there, but I wanted the squire to have those. And the way that I'm doing optional occupations are more like professions, and so I wanted to get that squire. And I understand profession, occupation might mean the same thing, but when I mean profession, means a normally non-adventuring profession, like a baker, a farmer, or a shepherd, or something like that. The squire actually has a kind of an adventuring function. They serve a knight or paladin. So I took that squire and moved it from the optional and put it definitively into the arms. Um, then I do have a rogue group. And why I decided to do a rogue group was because Normally, men of arms get an automatic parry, and I like that, but I wanted the rogues to have an automatic dodge, which is not something in this book, but it is in other Palladium books, especially like Rift's, Juicer's automatic dodge, and Palladium second edition have some automatic dodges. And I'm not completely against the other editions. It's just I want to make it more categorized. So men of arms get an automatic parry, and their bonus for the automatic parry is I allow two different. I allow a parry, and if a parry fails, I allow a dodge attempt instead of just choosing one or the other. So the benefit of a man of arms is they get an automatic parry. If they are aware and facing and have something to parry with, they can parry, and it does not take a attack. It does not use one of their attacks. If that parry misses, if they are not successful in parrying, then I allow a dodge. Now, for men of arms, the men of arms will then need to use up one of their attacks, their actions, but then they can at least attempt. So you kind of have two defensive for the men of arms. For the rogues, if they choose to parry, it's going to take away their an action, and then they can choose to take away another action for a dodge to get both. But if they want to forego the parry, the action cost of a parry, they can attempt an automatic dodge. So most of them will just not parry and will just try to do the automatic dodge. So that's just a little twist type of thing that I decided to give the different type of flavors to the who is out there fighting or in a military type organization or rough and tumble, say the bounty hunter, versus the sneaky type of men of arms, which now I just call rogues. Rogues are going to be your assassins, your pirates, your rangers, your spy, and your thief. I took entertainers directly from the third book, Adventures of the High Seas. The only main difference that I did was the Acrobat. They had an Acrobat tumbler, and it was like in one occupational character class that the Acrobat got these little skills, the tumbler got these other little skills, and certain character classes I see as being nifty, being neat, but I just didn't see a need to have that big difference. Kind of even like the Mercenary Sailor, Acrobat and Tumbler, I just have being the same thing. You just say that you do more tumbling than acrobatics, or you do more acrobatics than tumbling. The Bard is pretty much the same. I just, instead of having Bard slash actor slash this, it's kind of like the Bounty Hunter and the Yinsloth Jungle, was where that is. It's like Bounty Hunter slash Enforcer slash Slaver slash something else, just a bounty hunter, and you kind of define how you want that to be. The bard is a non-magical. In Palladium they were non-magical, so it is a knowledge bard, a entertainer bard, not a doing things to viciously mock your opponent bards. I mean, you could mock your opponent, but it's not going to do anything mystical. The gladiator is normally was a men of arms, but I decided to make it an entertainer. They're there to entertain you. Are you not entertained? But I give them a special paired with their paired weapons. They can get an automatic parry. So, and they count in certain ways as a men of arms. So sometimes I'll take something in a normal a group that's and bring something in as an exception. I always like exceptions every now and then. So the gladiator is the exception for the entertainers, where they have some men of arms ability. Then the prestidigitator, which is the juggler, prestidigitator straight from the third book. All those entertainers are straight out of the third book, just maybe some changes of what category I consider them, and that the academics are the studious mystics, the ones who have to study to gain power. Um, that is the Mystic Scholar, which I did. I took the monk from the Old Ones book, which is a pacifistic knowledge. They know so much about magic, but they will not use magic because in Palladium mythology, the Old Ones, the evil Cthulhu ancient type things, evil beyond understanding or alienist beyond understanding, the monks are afraid magic are going to wake them back up, and so they don't. Well, that mythology is not in my world, but I like the idea of a very studious scholar, and one of the optional occupational character classes in this book was a scholar. So I took that monk and I took the scholar and I kind of smashed them together. And again, there's certain things that, while interesting when you have thousands and thousands of people, in my home group, which just has a handful of people, I wanted certain things. I wanted more, not likability. I wanted there to be reasons to be something instead of just you're the one person out of 1,000 who decided that this is interesting to you. So I wanted to kind of maybe combine some things to make them a little more appealing. Appealing is the word. So I took the Mystic Scholar. I did give them an option to be a pacifist and use that monk non-combative combat chart type thing that they did a lot of dodging and rolling with punches. Rolling in Palladium was kind of your third option of defense in most Palladium games. You got your parry, you got your dodge, and then you roll. So if you failed parry, failed dodge, you could roll with a punch and take half damage. That's only available to the pacifistic uh, Mystic Scholar that I have. It doesn't apply to the one who would gain non men of arms, the combat, non men of arms. But that's kind of where I go for the Mystic. The Symbologist is a combination of the Diabolist, who is wards in Palladium, and the Summoner in Palladium. I kind of fused those together. Those were two classes that I always liked, and everybody always thinks about doing them, and nobody actually does them because it's like, yeah, it's kind of a cool thing, but you have to have so much forethought into it that it's not that. Again, make it a little more appealing by combining those two. When I get to those occupations, I'll show that. And then the wizard is straight pretty much out of here. I took the other mystical things from the other books and kind of took those into different categories based off of my philosophy of what they were. Intuits. Intuits are those who their mystical abilities come naturally to them. They're not things that they necessarily learn. They're things that they have that they can hone and improve on, but it's not studious. And those are the adept. The adept I took basically there is there's no such thing in this book, but in Rifts they had a character class that I really liked called the Mystic, and then they had a very similar occupational character class, or maybe they call it psychic character classes in Palladium Second Edition called the Psi Mystic. It was somebody who intuitively can do magic and psionics, and I really liked that concept, and it fit very well with how I explained my elves yesterday. The elves with the F are the magic, the inherently magical or mystical. So I decided to make that a depth, and I usually in like my game Dunamis, there are depths that know things naturally. So that is basically the rules from those two games kind of transplanted into a first edition version, and that's the adept. They know that. Beastmaster are the ones that are just like, say, the movie or TV show The Beastmaster. They can link up with different familiars, and they don't shape change or anything like that. They just have natural abilities over animals. The healer always seemed from here to me as being a physical psychic. They had ISP, and that's why I say psychic. But it was based off of their physical endurance. But it seemed like they used their health and their own um, fortitude to help others. So they kind of used their life force and fortitude to kind of kindle that spark of life and healing in others. And to me, here they're listed as clergy in the clergy section, but they're not beholden to any deity, and they don't get their powers from any deity or any other outside. It's completely internal, and that just seemed kind of, again, a little strange to me. Other people might be perfectly happy with it and consider them kind of spiritual, even if not clergy. But as you can see here in the Palladium book, they are under the clergy, the healer, right there. So that was something that I decided that I wanted to be a more intuitive type occupation. The Illusionists and the Mind Mage also are ones that would know. Illusionist comes from the second book of the old ones. Mind Mage is from here, where they have Men of Magic. I have psychic abilities, psychic powers, as being mentally and knowing. That's why for those who aren't starting in and Intuit's also that needs to be your very first occupation. You cannot, that is one of the few ones that you cannot go into one of those later. It's basically you're born with that ability, and that ability would manifest before you're of adventuring age, whatever that is for your species. And so the Mind Mage and Illusionists, they're natural abilities that come, and again, they can learn, and they can, they have it within them, and then they teach themselves or hone their abilities, improve their abilities, but they don't study their abilities. And then clergy, I have beloved. That is my change of the name for the witch. There's a lot of terms that Palladium use that either A, to me, don't make sense in how it's used, or B, I just don't want to use real world terms, even if at least in later editions, witches in Palladium, they specifically say like, "Oh, this isn't supposed to be a uh, a take on Wiccans. This is more of talking about Halloween witches or movie witches." I just see that as much as I understand that they're not trying to like belittle Wiccans. It would be like trying to say the same thing that, oh, instead of the priest calling them, Catholic priests, and then saying, oh no, it has nothing to do with Catholicism or something like that. So I have a whole different mythology behind my people who connect with a devil lord. Um, they don't get a lot of direction. Clergy are religious, or say priests are religious, and clerics are religious, and paladins are religious in a way that is ceremonies and rituals that need to be done, and certain things it's like organized religion. Whereas a beloved, they consider themselves loved by their devil lord, because they basically get some goals that are required of them in their pact, which is very similar to the pact in here, but they get to do it however they want, and they don't have to recruit other people. They can if they want, but they don't have to necessarily recruit other people, unless part of their pact is you will establish a religion. But they get to do it how they want. They're not bound by tradition and things like that. So they consider themselves free, even though they've sold their soul to a devil lord. They consider themselves free because they're given goals, but they choose the way. They're not micromanaged. How about that? Then I have a cleric. What is the cleric? The cleric is the shaman from here, and again, this is somewhat various reasons getting away from the real world term of shaman. Also, the shaman in this book has higher requirements than a priest, and they get all the abilities of a priest except for, like if we look here under priests, the clergy. So there are various categories of special abilities. So spellcasting for a shaman works exactly like a priest. Choosing and gaining spells works exactly like the shaman uses the priest of light spell chart, but the priest of darkness actually get a couple of bonus spells, but otherwise they're about the same. But their magic combat is exactly the same. Their penance and sacrifice is exactly the same. Clerical abilities are let's see. You go to shaman. So I'll just actually go here. Magic combat, identical to clergy, gods of light. Clerical abilities are if you're a light shaman, it's light. If you're a dark shaman, it's darkness. The difference in their casting and their scrolls and everything is exactly, or sorry, they can't do scrolls, but their selling of healing touch and being able to do the healing touch, all of that is the same. The difference is they can't create scrolls, and they don't get the same prayers, and their prayers, in my opinion, are less than what they are for the priest. So you need a higher requirement, but you're kind of a lesser priest in that way. So what I did is I decided to have a occupation that was between the priest and the paladin. So I took the paladin from the men of arms and put them into the clergy, and I did that for a couple of reasons. One, on my world, my mythology, and again, your three keys: your group, your system, and the purpose, the setting of the game. My setting, my world has orders of knights and orders of paladins. Orders of paladins are devoted to a deity, and orders of knights are secular orders that can be devoted. Sometimes they will guard magic users. Sometimes they will have a theme or a purpose, and that's what the knightly orders are. But the paladin orders are always religious, associated with some type of deity. So they're martial, and what I did is I took the Crusader from the from the eighth book, Yinslaw Jungles, and I took their harming touch ability as well as them getting spells starting at fifth level, which is very similar to paladins in D&D, and I took that and I put it onto the paladin from this book, but I took away the automatic parry and made it so they automatically parry only if they're using a shield. So I kind of lessened the automatic parry a little bit, but gave them other options in the spell casting at fifth level, the harming touch at second level, and that way I could kind of separate them more from the knight. In this book, a paladin was just a better knight. Basically, you rolled stats, and if you could be a paladin, you were a paladin. If you couldn't, then you were a knight. If you reached those, they were the exact same thing, except for a paladin was a little bit better. And one, I think the knights might have gotten a slightly better when you're 15th level, with their hand to hand. We look at the knight versus the paladin. The the knight gets a +5 to parry and dodge. The paladin gets a +4 to parry and dodge. But the knight has a better damage. They get their attacks faster, multiple attacks faster, the same strike, etc. So basically, paladins and knights were practically the same, with the paladin being a little bit better knight. And I wanted to kind of separate them a little bit more. So that's why I moved them to there. With the priest, though, versus a cleric, I got rid of the shaman name, made them a cleric, gave them a very similar type. They still get a lesser men of arms skill instead of the paladin skill, which is kind of the epitome of martial combat. They get more of the soldier. A priest will get only the non-men of arms combat or lesser ones, and then the clerics get a middle ground automatic parry, not exactly what the men of arms get, more similar to what the paladins get, but they're kind of a middle ground. So if you have a religious organization, you have the priests who are the not really martial focused. You have the paladins, which are extremely martial focused, and you have the clerics, which are kind of the middle. So that's what they are. Druids worship nature. Basically, I put them in here. I added a primate totem, as well as I took dinosaurs and added them to the avian totem because I wanted people to have the chance to become like a velociraptor, shape change into a Deinonychus or something like that. So the druids worship nature, so that's why I put them in the clergy. Talked about the paladin, the priest, the servitor is what I call the warlock. There were the names. Diabolus usually means like a person associated with a devil or with the devil, Satan, and in Palladium it was somebody who dealt with wards. A warlock in tradition is a male witch or a male worshiper of a devil. And in Palladium, Warlock was an elementalist. And yes, I could have called them elementalists, but in my own game, Dunamis, I call them servitors. They're servants of the elemental lords. They get their power, so that's why I have them as clergy. And here they're considered men of magic, as well as witches being considered men of magic and not clergy, which always kind of, again, healers aren't associated with any type of deity or higher power, and they're considered a clergy, whereas witches who get their power from a unholy power, but a power, higher power nonetheless, and elemental lords, which are a higher power, and they're men of magic. So that's why I moved a lot of those things around. And then my optional are the commoner, which was, I think, like the peasant or farmer. And here it's just commoner. They are ones who would be you choose a secondary skill, and that's kind of what you are. If you're cooking, you can be a baker or something along that. If you choose, say, smithing, you can be a blacksmith or whatever that secondary skill you choose. That is kind of what you are. Merchants, kind of self-explanatory, straight out of this book here. Noble, straight out of this book, and noble is the only way to have that background saying I'm a noble. So put it in writing, put it in as your occupation if that is the background that you want, or not just from a fallen noble and it doesn't mean anything except for I have these extra little bonuses. But if you are somebody who wants to be that prince or princess or duke or whatever, then be a noble. And the naturalist is what I took as the nomadic tribesman from the Insloth jungle, and I wanted a kind of a catch-all type. That they have their own combat thing that I liked, but I wanted a occupation that could be something akin to a trapper, not necessarily a ranger, who I see as more of a guide or moving through wilderness instead of just like trapping for money. A mountain man, hermits, people who live off the land type thing. So that is what the naturalist is. So those are kind of my occupations there. So this is just the explanation. I try to do the same layout for every single occupation, and as I go through some of these, I'll break them down. But over here, you can kind of see the occupation name. Kind of, I tried to do a really quick description of what they were. Palladium. This book will have pages of just fluff, which is fine, especially at this time when there wasn't an internet. That if somebody wanted to know why the author of a book did something in a certain way, the way was to read this. You'll read a lot of Kevin Simbita's thoughts, especially like Wizards, why he doesn't agree with the fire and forget type of spellcasting Vancian magic and why he presents it differently. I don't need to explain that in a book. I can explain it here on my videos, or I can just answer my table, or people can, type in me and find that information. I don't need to put it into the rewrite. So I try to keep my description kind of small. Attribute requirements, again, alignment, if there's any restrictions on alignment, what those are needed. Physical conditioning is something that I added specifically to help men of arms be men of arms, or help those who physically train be a little bit better with the shock points. In this book, they didn't have shock points. Everything was only hit points for people. And every level, you gained a d6 hit points. And it didn't matter if it wasn't like D&D where fighters gained a d10 or a d8 depending on which D&D, and say a magic user only gained a d4 or a d6. Everybody only gained a d6. So what I decided, instead of making it so that fighters get a d10 and wizards get a d4 in shock points, I give certain occupations a bonus. So the very hardy men of arms will get a +8. And what that means is that they roll their d6, they add 8, and that's their shock points. And then after that, they roll the d6 and add to it. So they get like an 8-point buffer. It's not a whole lot, but it is some. And that's one of the things I am trying to do old school, where you don't just get hundreds and hundreds of shock points or hit points, but I do want something there. So I was trying to find a middle ground between just ridiculous number of points, call it hit points or SDC, whatever you want to call them, shock points, or the barely anything, and anything is you sneeze wrong and you die. Um, Also, it goes along with the way that I did the shock points rolling. It's whatever your highest is. So here, that bonus is whatever the highest is. So, for example, you're a mercenary, you get +8. If you become a wizard, the wizard has 0, so you don't gain any. And if you then switch to somebody that, say, gives you a +4 physical conditioning for +4, you still don't get anything because you already have an 8. But if you went the other way, then that training, that part of that experience that you're getting as you're kind of the zero level before you get that first level, then you will if you go the opposite. So if you're a wizard and have nothing, you just roll your d6. That's how many shock points you have. Now I switch to be an entertainer that, say, Acrobat or somebody maybe gives me a +4. So now I add 4 to that because I've gone through that training, that conditioning. That gives me an extra 4. If I go back to be a wizard, I'm not going to gain anything. But say then I move on and become a mercenary at a +8. Well, now I'm going to get 4 more points, the difference. So you go up, but you don't get the lower ones. So it's a kind of a one-way road in that way. Armor tier, basically, I took the armor rules of here and very solidified them as what tier you are. Tier 1 are like most men of arms in here, the heavy men of arms like knights, mercenaries, paladins. Light armor only messes with their prowl, nothing else. And heavy armor, light armor does not do anything. Heavy armor only messes with prowl. Tier 2 are ones that are in here that are kind of the middle ones. I want to say like maybe the Rangers have it, where if you, because basically in here, each occupation might have different rules for what they did. So like they have it that they can wear any type, but there are certain ones that they have a probably can't find it because I'm looking for it, but they had different restrictions. They had the non-men of arms armor and armor restrictions, which I've mentioned or talk about being for wizards and clergy and stuff, but then when you look at the wizards, they give a different chart. So basically, I broke things down into 3. Tier 1 is you only have restriction against prowl with heavy armor, nothing against light armor. You're trained in that. For um, Tier 2, which would be a lot of the rogues, then you would get that prowl bonus instead of only being for heavy would be for the light armor and then a little bit more, maybe a couple of points of parry and dodge, etc. for the heavy armor, and then for the tier 3, each armor, the light armor is going to give a little more penalties, and the heavy armor is going to get even more. When we actually get to the tiers, it might be a little bit different, because when I start reading this stuff, all the information in my head kind of falls out. But that's what the armor tier is, what penalties, and it was very simple to just say you're tier 1, you're tier 2, you're tier 3, instead of having to read through lots of things and trying to find out what restrictions, if any, you have. Elective skills and secondary skills, basically, I just condensed the skill lists. And when we get to that, I'll explain why and what I did. Give the level chart, like which is the most things, abilities, if there's any special abilities that are given, and starting equipment. Um, this book, they basically just break it down into men of arms get this, clergy get this, men of magic get this, optional get this. And then when you read the other books, especially like Yen Sloth, they take the equipment and do all kinds of weird stuff. And you noticed maybe when I was going through occupations that I don't have the witch hunter and I don't have the undead hunter, because they are something that I personally believe are outside of the realm of Palladium First Edition. A first level, one of those two occupational character classes is easily equivalent to a third to fifth level occupation in the normal, what I consider normal. Or so basically, I just did some starting equipment, listed each one for each occupation, and then the experience chart. Oh, the level chart is something that was kind of inspired by the magic combat charts that uh, Palladium had, but certain things, since I broke up my combat into four different stances, four different combats, then I wanted a list of every level. What do you gain? What do you gain at this level? What because that was another thing that people, I personally didn't really have a problem with, but some of my players, when they'd gain up a level, they were like, "What do I get on this level? I have to read all of this stuff," and or you would read it. An example, I was going over the priest with one of my players, and for the longest time, we thought he was able to do something, and then in this tiny section, it says like, "Oh, they get this at level 5." So we were like, "Oh, okay, you don't, you have to read so much into it." So I decided to break it down every single level. What do I get at this level? And that also includes the men of arms. I wanted there to be a more reason to be a men of arms, that they get something every level. And that something might just be that was the level that you get those extra elective or secondary skills. I just thought I had it, but I didn't. So let's move on. Okay, so bounty hunter, and most things until we get to clerics, which have all these extra abilities, most things are one page. One page will explain everything, and that includes even the a lot of the intuits and magical, the academics, the rogues, the men of arms. All of them kind of nicely fit on one page, which is pretty nice. So here's an example. We have the bounty hunter. Bounty hunter again comes from the eighth book, where I just took out a bunch of the slashes, because I want to say there was like 4 or 5 uh, bounty hunter slash enforcer slash slaver slash something else. Um, Call them bounty hunter. Physical conditioning 8. Again, that 8 is added to their d6 for their shock points. Armor tier is 2. They're not military heavy armored fighters, but they are men of arms, so they get a tier 2 restrictions, none. They don't have any type of alignment restrictions or species restrictions, etc. Occupational skills, that is what is given. They are that occupation. These are the skills that they're given. And then the level chart. So at level 1, choose 8 electives and 5 secondaries. And I do break it down just like they do in here, which here, unlike the later Palladium books in first edition, they would have 2 lists: an elective skill list, which is only these are allowed, and then a secondary skill list, which is all secondary skills are allowed, but these are the ones that give you a bonus, basically, because they didn't want to have to. It's one skill list. So instead of doing that skill list over and over, it was, let's just give you the ones with bonuses. So first level, what's the special thing you did? You get some skills. So you get 8 elective and 5 secondary. That's pretty much going to be straight from the book. But then I started adding things to fill in those between levels and make sure that every character class, every occupation gets something every level. So at level 2, they get 2 additional hit points. So and 2 might not seem like a lot, but I've seen many times where somebody's died by 1 or 2 hit points. And since the shock points are different and things with death in the name bypass the shock points, having any higher amount of hit points can be very, very life-saving and help. So they get 2 additional hit points. And then at 3, they get the kick attack. Normally it would be whatever. Basically, I took the Men of Arms combat would sometimes have a kick attack in it. If we look here, they get like a kick attack at a certain level. So I took that away from the combat aspect and put it into the occupation aspect. And then I have it do 2ds, because if a normal punch is going to be a 1ds, so I make it kick a 2ds, plus the physical strength bonus. And if you're doing it to SDC, it's going to be double the damage before the SDC, depending on the material, divides by 5 or 10. Basically, I just like the idea of a bounty hunter kicking in a door to get to his mark, knowing how to do things like that. So that is why it's double damage to SDC, which, remember, are items, walls, doors, armor, stuff like that. They just know how to hit those places hard. Not people, but for that. They do get a knockdown kick, which makes sense for a bounty hunter to be able to kick somebody and knock them down so they can put manacles on them or whatnot. But second level, additional hit points, kick attack, third or fourth level, then that's where that's the normal place secondary skills normally happen. Then 2 additional shock points, then their elective skills, because that's where they were given their elective skills, the knockdown kick, and then they start trading off between extra hit points, extra shock points, and their elective skills and secondary skills are put there straight from the Innsloth Jungle, which was from the normal books. And then over in abilities, I explain what those kick attack and the knockdown attack are, starting equipment, and then the experience level chart. The red number there is if you are in a different character class and you're trying to get to that character class or that occupation, that's how many experience points you need to get. It's just a very simple way to draw the eye. It's in red, that's the number. Instead of going 1, 2, 3, whatever, you just go to, or trying to figure out, is this a mystic or is this not? That's why that is in red. I wanted to go through that one in a little more detail. I'll go through the other ones a little faster. The knight is pretty much straight from here. Even the code of chivalry, which is an optional thing. If you're principled, you probably do it. If you're aberrant, you probably do it. If you're other alignments, then you may or may not, depending. I gave them a physical conditioning of 8. If you look at their level attainment, the skills are where they would be normally in this book. I did do a lot of the hit point, shock point type things for those levels that in the original they didn't get anything. And the same thing with elective skills and secondary skills. Um, the one thing I did add is they get a squire at 6th level. I like the idea of knights and fighters and even mages and stuff in basic D&D. Once they got enough fame, they acquired kind of followers and servants and stuff like that. And to me, a knight and a paladin, it would be cool to have a squire, that they get a squire. The squire is going to start off at 1st level, um, mainly unless you would have another player who would want to play that squire, which is actually somewhat going to happen in the games that I am playing. One of the players decided he wanted to be a squire, so he's going to at some point hook up with the paladin. For the knights, they get him at level 6. I believe the paladins I made wait till level 7 because paladins do get some more divine, divinity, harming touch, some spells and stuff like that. So I gave it earlier to the knight. But yeah, basically the difference between the knight is then this is they get those extra shock points, hit points every now and then they get the squire. They're a tier 1. They are trained in the heavy armor, so the heavy armor doesn't give them a lot of disadvantage and no disadvantage at all from the light armor. Uh, Equipment and then the experience chart. Basically, they have the code of chivalry made it so that it didn't fit on one page. Otherwise, it would have. Longbowman um, is another 8. The uh, things that I gave them, like aim shot, superior range, parry arrows, is from the 2nd edition of Palladium. Again, even though my gut feeling and my dislike for 2nd edition Palladium is not total. There are things in there that I liked, and I liked the idea of the aim shot, automatic or superior range, and parry arrows. So I put those in there, and I also gave them an automatic dodge instead of parry. One of the rules in my system is the way the archery stance or the range stance work is you can only attack or move. You can't do both, and you cannot parry. So you can dodge if you have an automatic dodge. So that's why I gave them an automatic dodge instead of automatic parry, because the automatic parry they wouldn't be able to use as a longbowman shooting bows. So that's what that is. The Mercenary Sailor, I explained why I kind of combined those two. And the difference here is if you look at occupational skills, they both get hand to hand mercenary, and that was straight from the Adventures of the High Sea. Sailors get the hand to hand mercenary, um, small shields, scale walls, and then you choose mercenary or sailors. Mercenary get a forced march, sailors get rope work, sailing, and swimming. Um, and then again, many of these things are just the levels that they get the skills, additional shock points and hit points. But I give them a few little skills that, again, that I've grabbed from different sources. Quick, they add some speed to their combat because of the way I change combat, just to give them a little more speed, and a jack of all trades, which is a flat out 5% to all percentage based skills. I might have got that from like the Vagabond or something from Riffs, because I do look around at all the other things and was trying to incorporate stuff. I figure mercenaries and sailors are self sufficient. They're not directly they are paid, but they need to learn to improvise and stuff. They're not always next to good supply routes and supply chains and things like that. Oh, the other change, the force march might not seem a lot when you get sailors with this, but sailors get tier 3 armor, mercenaries get tier 1. So that's the trade off. Soldier is again physical conditioning of 8, tier 1 armor. all of this is straight out of this book as the soldier, and then they get a lot of that flip back and forth between shock points and hit points to fill those levels. They get a formation fighting, which I like the idea of. They are trained to work with other soldiers, and um, if they working with an ally in the same stance, which would probably be a hand to hand stance, then they get a +1 to strike. Just a small bonus, but a bonus nevertheless. And then it stacks with other bonuses. Um, and I give them a little more discounts for buying armor and armor because it's helping whatever they are a soldier of, that military organization. Squire, again, I took Squire from the optional, put it in the Men of Arms, and they get the tier 1. They get the best armor wearing ability, physical conditioning, a +8. This isn't just a you can get this extra follower at level 6 or 7 if you're a knight or paladin. If you want to be a squire, if you want to be a knight, but you just did not hit those requirements, you can be a squire and be really, really freaking close to a knight. They get hand to hand knight or paladin, depending on if they're a squire of a secular organization or a religious organization. They get forced march. They get horsemanship knight, which is one of the higher than general. They get small shield and a short sword, as well as they can choose other weapon proficiencies, anything except for a longbow. They can get thrown combat general. Again, I broke up combat into 4 stances, and each stance kind of has in Palladium what they did. I'll talk about that in skills. Basically, Palladium had a weird way of doing actions and attacks per melee, and I kind of more codified them into my stances. But they can be a really, really good choice for a player to have as a character. They get ability Squire Shield. They can parry attacks aimed at allies next to them if it can be parried by a shield with it, if they're within 2 meters or yards. And embodiment, they become some way an extension of their knight or paladin that they serve, and they can get a certain ability. The knight gets an ability right and righteously. The paladins get harming touch, and they can learn that as well. So that kind of also gives that squire a little slight difference depending on if they're going serving a knight or serving a paladin. Let's go back to the knight. Do I have that ability? Oh, I might have to look at that. There are some things that I either forget take out and forget to take out somewhere else. Um, but yeah, that was what the squire is. Assassin moved to the rogue category, so physical conditioning is less. It's a 6 instead of an 8, but it's still a decent armor tier of 2. And then rogues are going to get less of the +2/+2 to hit points and shock points every few levels. They will still get some, but not as much because they're not men of arms, but they'll get other things. So for the assassins, they're only going to get they're going to get 1 additional hit point or shock points, not 2 at those levels, but they will get extra things like a heavy kick. The assassin will get the because of the hand to hand, which isn't shown here, they will get that death blow, which when we get to that, I'll explain that better. But they get that heavy kick um, that is a little different. It's similar, but a little different than the one that is given to the bounty hunter. They basically their size die goes higher, and instead of it just being a 2, and it can be used in any stance, and it's not only against SDC. Poison Master allows them to combine various poisons and take the best effect of each of them, and Assassin's Kiss allows them to do that death blow using any ranged or thrown weapon, not just a melee weapon. So that's the assassin. We have the pirate. Again, some things I gave them: death from above, wild eye, which gives you like a crazy eye look, to give an intimidation type check, and then a kind of a help if they get knocked out and are going to go for coma death saves. They get a little bonus to those. Being a pirate, a little harder to kill. It's a little harder to send a pirate to Davy Jones's locker. We'll just say that. Um, Rangers again is one that I moved from the men of arms to the rogue. They get a +6 as well. I think the pirates get a +6, so the rogues get a +6, where the other ones get a +8. I gave them. I went kind of D&D-ish, not with spells, but with the whole nature and animal communication. So I gave them a few similar druid abilities, but at later levels, like an animal calm, befriend animals, and I give them familiar link, but at 14th level. So you really have to be a really, really freaking high ranger, but it is there. So it's not quite as easy as D&D, but it isn't quite just they're completely mundane, like in the Palladium here. Spy straight from Yinsloth Jungle, and Eyeball a Feller comes from the Vagabond from Rifts. Again, that's something that I just decided to yank. I gave them that quickness, trying to differentiate them and a thief a bit. Um, but that's the spy. They get a lot of skills. You'll see they get two electives, three secondary, two electives. So one of the spies things is getting more skills. The thief, you'll see here, they do get that eyeball feller, but instead of quick, they get takedown, and they don't get as many skills. So that's kind of, again, trying to certain things they'll be similar for, and other things they'll be different. Acrobat. Now we go into entertainers, which most of them I think also probably get a +6 now that I'm seeing the acrobat. But they get more skills: quick, leap, jump, auto dodge. So they will at some point get an auto dodge. They don't start men of arms normally, except for we saw the longbowmen. They get automatic parry. Rogues get automatic dodges. Entertainers don't, but here at level 10, the acrobat will get the auto dodge. So that's given. So quick, leap, jump, automatic dodge is their thing. The bard, you'll see they get that eyeball of feller. They get a charismatic charm, some hit points and shock points, but they also are ones that get more skills because they are more knowledgeable. Is their thing in Palladium, entertaining and knowledgeable. Gladiators are entertainers. Instead of getting a lot of extra hit points because they're entertainers, they're going to get some skills, and those skills, especially the electives, could be various weapons. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not combative. And at to start off with, instead of having an automatic parry, they get a double parry. That if they're using two weapons, they have paired weapons. If you fail to parry with one, you can attempt to parry with the other one. If you do that, then you can't do that dodge. So dodges are useful for things that you would not normally be able to, say, parry with a sword, like a fireball. You really can't knock it out of the way with the sword, or a lightning bolt. Fireball, you might be able to parry with a shield, block with a shield, but with the double parry, if it's weapons or something coming at you, then you can try the one weapon. If not, try to knock it away with the other weapon. So it's not exactly the same, but I wanted to give them a similar option. So that's where the gladiators are. Prestidigitators, their big thing from Palladium First Edition, but the third book is that they had a really, really good way of throwing knives. So in my throne combat, the highest level of thrown combat is only open to the prestidigitator, and they can throw a lot of things um, in the thrown combat stance, and they get some bonuses when they're throwing things. They get some extra little bonuses to parry, so those would be added even to any combat skill that they get. The juggling I toned down. I was googling and looking for world records for how many things you could juggle, and the amount of things that you can juggle, which was like one per level. Start off with like say six, and then an additional one per level. In Palladium, the third book was just so out of the realm of reality that I kind of toned it down a little and made it more realistic, because they're not mystical jugglers, they're just entertainers, but it's still somewhat impressive. Basically, instead of it being one every level, I think I have it where it's one every other level. So, uh, and then I talk about how they automatically can do it where somebody else might need to roll some d6s versus PP, which I explained how that works in the previous one. Um, Automatic parry, they do get an automatic parry like a warrior would, or similar to a men of arms, but they get it at level 7. So certain ones will get it, but they don't get it automatically. Mystic Scholar, I explained how that works. The French of the scholar and the monk, which was a scholarly monk, not a martial art monk from the second book, old ones. And their whole thing, you look at their level chart here, it's just learning skills. They're knowledgeable. That is what they are going to get, and they get the difference. They can choose evasive combat, which is the pacifistic combat, um, or they can choose the I want to say the non men of arms. They will get magic defenses, so their knowledge of magic will allow them to counter magic spells, circles, insanity, psychic, mystic. I guess is what it is. They will get magic points, even though they can't cast spells, but they might be able to learn circles. So they will get a base magic points that might be used for the future. Symbologist is my combination of Diabolist and Summoner from this book. Um, the Summoner, in my opinion, again, my opinion doesn't mean I'm correct. My opinion is summoners in this book are redundant. If you look at the Summoner or the Diabolist can potentially, and I do admit that, learn any circle that a summoner can know. The difference is the summoner can will start off with the knowledge of all protection circles and the knowledge of all summoning circles. They will not start with any power circles. Power circles they need to find. A Diabolist will start off with no circles, but they will be able to find, or if they find any circle, they can figure it out. And if you look at the two charts, and I'll bend the page, kind of show you here. Okay, so if you look, the difference, the Diabolist has an 18 and an 8, and the Summoner here has a 20 and a 10. So only 2 percentage points difference. And when you go down to the bottom, the Summoner is a 99.99, and the Diabolist, go back, the Diabolist has a 99.97. So the deciphering, the first number is to deduce it. What does this new circle do? And the second one is to decipher it so that you can actually make it. By the 15th level, they both have the same percentage to deduce the function, and still for the decipher, it's only a 2% less for the Diabolist. So my personal opinion was always be a Diabolist and go out looking for circles. Um, or learn everything from a summoner. It just didn't seem necessary to have two completely different occupations when one of them can do everything that the other one can do, and the other one can't learn anything that unique. The summoner could not learn wards, but the Diabolist who knew all the wards could learn all the circles. So basically, again, for appeal, both of these occupations were something that many of my players have, and myself have always wanted to try, but we never did because they do take a lot of forethought. If you combine two things, and I added some rules to allow them to be the ones who make magic weapons. I don't have alchemists, but in Palladium, the alchemist was an NPC that you had to be certain level of wizard, you had to be certain level summoner, you had to be a certain level diabolist, and then you could become wizard. I just made it so that Symbologist could do that. So if you want to have that artificer type, enchanter type that makes magic items, then the Symbologist is what you would be, and that's kind of the appeal to them. So they get a lot of what I want to say. Instead of the additional hit points and shock points, they get additional magic points. I'll explain that when I get to the magic. They regenerate as they go up levels. Certain levels, they will generate more magic points per hour. And I'll explain that whole way of thinking. Very similar to how when I get to damage and healing, how I explain that. But I do let them, because it's a mix, they don't start off with all the circles, but at every level, they themselves can figure out two figure out new circles of protection summoning each level. So here's a chart. So at level 1, they can start off with 3. They can look at the circles and choose 3. Then they get 4, so they get one more at level 2, and then another one at level 3 until at level 15 they get up to 28 that they've figured out themselves, plus whatever they've learned outside of that. The wizard is the same pretty much as in here. The difference is they get magic points instead of spell slots, and they do not automatically gain. In Palladium First Edition, very much like D&D old editions, you only get what you find and learn. You don't get a new level and automatically learn something. Like even in Palladium Second Edition, they I think might get a spell per level that they learn, but all spell magic is available to them, so they get those base. I think it's like 6 spells. I make Enchanted Cauldron, that's a spell. Decipher Magic, Cloud of Slumber, Globe of Daylight, Tongue, so five. Um, they get those spells, and they can. I changed scroll conversion to be also magic book conversion. So if they find another person's spell book, they can learn that. So they have a few more ways that they can learn spells in game by study, because they're the studious, the academic mystic, but they do not automatically gain spells. Their things, special things, are gaining additional magic points and regenerating magic points as they go higher. Um, the adept, that's the one that was the psi mystic or mystic, depending on if you're looking at Rifts or Palladium Second Edition. Basically, they get a certain number of spells per and psychic abilities per level. They start off with a lot more than most things do, but they gain less than, say, a Mind Mage, or they don't have that potential of knowing every spell magic that they find. And even the priests only get around that many. Say this is 24, around that many spells, but priests and clerics, they get a lot more other abilities as they level, where the adepts don't get all those special prayers and special abilities that the clergy get. Um, Since everything is internal and they learn internally, they don't get magic points. They fuel spells as well as psychic abilities off of ISP, inner strength points. So that was kind of my definitive, this is different. Magic points are either through you're getting magic from your deity or you're an academic, and if it's internal, not learned and not from a higher power, it's going to be ISP, and that's how they fuel their thing. So the spell and psychic power acquisition, inner strength points. Beastmaster are the one intuits that don't have an ISP. They just automatically, and at certain levels, they will get different familiar or more familiars. Like here, that level 2, they get a familiar link. At level 5, they get an additional familiar. They're a little more hardy, a little more combative, so they get some shock points. They get another familiar, another familiar, another familiar, and a few more shock points. They don't get hit points because familiar link in Palladium gives hit points. So every time they get a familiar, they will get an additional 3 hit points per familiar. I took it kind of away from the extra d6, or maybe it was 6 points, because again, I'm doing more management of hit points for that old school feel without being it just you get hit and you just fall over dead. And then the animal though gets I think it was plus d6 plus 2 is what it originally was, and that would just be a lot every level. So I gave it 3 per familiar, or sorry, per familiar, but the familiar gets that full benefit because um, having your familiar dies, while a necessity for that chance to happen, does suck. So I did not want to take away that. Plus, familiars don't get a d6 per level; they don't level up. So there's a picture I did of the Beastmaster, the healer. Healer again is the inner strength points based off of their own health, their own fortitude that they are mystically able to give others. The big concern I had with the healers that were in here, besides them being clergy, but that was easy enough to change them to be intuits, was that they topped out at level 3 and their healing abilities were worse than a priest and or a mind mage. So I added some more powers to them, and I made their have more of a reason besides just more ISP that they got when going up higher levels. Um, a lot of those will be shown when we do the healer abilities later. But they get healer powers, inner strength points, they get some resistances, and then they'll get some additional ISP as they level and regenerate ISP higher per level as they increase. Again, we'll have to wait till a later part when I go over the actual mystic abilities. I'm not going to do all that. I know this has already been a very long time and it's going to even be longer, so I'm not going to add that. We'll get into that on a different one. Illusionist is from the Old Ones book 2. They are kind of their psychic powers go into illusions, not into mind mage type powers, but they will be able to recognize illusions, sense emotions, um, get more, or not get more ISP, but have it regenerate better, get some skills, sense psychic enchantment. That is, they will be able to know if somebody is being mind controlled, basically, and sense magic enchantment. So even they're used to being used to understanding manipulation of people. So at some point they'll even be able to sense it magically and not just psionically. But some of the things they get illusion acquisition that's shown later, recognize illusion, sense emotion, sense supernatural good or evil. That is one thing I didn't like necessarily. The auras telling what alignment you were, so I changed things to be supernatural good or evil, so they can't just look at somebody and say, "Oh, they're saying they're good, but they're actually evil," um, or seeing auras that way. And then the sensing, like I said, Then we go to Mind Mage from this book. Added a few things. When we get into the actual psychic powers, we'll see that. Within the psychic power acquisition later, they get things like recognize illusions, higher regeneration of ISP, and that, but very much straight from here. Beloved are witches from here. I've already explained why I changed their name. I condensed all the packs into one. I've had two, three, four. I've had four players within my campaigns that have been witches, and all of them have chosen the Selling Body of Soul pack that is presented in here. Nobody has ever done a minor pack that I've ever seen, because the animal familiar is not as good as the devil or demon familiar, and the bonuses that they get just aren't as good, and you have to be kind of the same thing. You just get less powers for it. So I took that information of my group and condensed it, and was able to just make it all one type of pact. And basically, it's that complete and total loyalty and obedience to the Devil Lord. My mythology doesn't have devil and demon lords. There's not that fight. There's only devil lords. Demons are more of animals of hell. Devils are intelligent creatures from hell, or fallen angels that are in hell, that type of thing. But otherwise, I kind of took those packs, combined it, and it is a soul pack. It is you sign your soul over. When you die, the Devil Lord gets your soul, but until then, you have get all that power. Here, and it probably was with Intuits also. A lot of the Intuits I wasn't looking did not have physical conditioning. A healer is supposed to be that fortitude within, so they do get that +2. And even the Beastmaster, who can be somewhat of a martial, they don't. Adepts, wizards. So that is where, for the rogues, for the entertainers, for the men of arms, that physical conditioning comes up. And other than the rare one and the other groups, they don't get that. Here we do have an alignment evil only. Probably the assassin and thief did. I just didn't look at it. Um, Different restrictions. They will get the familiar link. So that's, if you read here, you read familiar link, and then later on you have to figure out, where did I get that? Here I just put it on the chart, and then later I explain it. So they get the familiar link. They get the ability to summon lesser devils and demons. So those abilities that given here, I still keep them. I just put them in a chart, so the player immediately knows if they get at that level or when they get it. And then that means that for those men of arms, I get to give them those little bonuses of the 2 hit points and the 2, shot points here and there, so they get something. So then the heal self type thing that they can get, their magic points, how they get prayers. Their spells, I just like calling them prayers, because they're given that abilities by a higher power. And then I explain some of their things here. That in here, you choose one special ability. I like the idea of, at certain levels you get that special ability, or get an additional one. So I give one at first level, at 7th level, and at 14th level. And then we go cleric. Cleric, like I said, is what I took the shaman out, replaced it with a lot of those abilities, and made it that middle between martial and the martial paladin, and the completely non-martial, or mostly non-martial priest. And so they get like level 2 healing touch. That's what they would get in here. I just put it on a chart. Same here, resurrection, sense supernatural evil. Sometimes I might have adjusted things by a level or two. Being the marshal, they're going to get hit points and shock points, but then they also get some magic points way down here, and then some more hit points. And they get the +2 instead of the +1, because they are in that kind of fighting-ish martial aspect. But then they get all these abilities. Um, Here, their version of the parry, they get an automatic parry, but if they fail a parry, they cannot dodge afterwards. So that is the lesser. The Men of Arms, I wanted that really good. You get the automatic parry, and then if you fail, you get to dodge. But for the clerics, they're not fully martial, so they get that automatic parry, but if they do so, they can't attempt the dodge. The druid is very much, like I said, straight from here. I added the primate totem, and I added dinosaurs to uh, the bird totem, avian totem. Here they get some additional shock points and hit points, although I think I said additional here, so sometimes I just didn't write the whole thing. A lot of spelling, grammar things. When I'm the one writing it, I'm gonna make errors, so it's not like it goes through a bunch of proofreading. But otherwise, all these abilities are pretty much straight from the book. Again, there might be some minor adjustments, but the bird, totem, hawk, owl, sparrow, dinosaur, and then I have the primate, monkey, lemur, ape type thing. I just found always that lacking. To this day, I still wonder if I should put in some type of insect arachnid totem and or a reptilian one. So far, I haven't. I'm trying to keep. Uh, I think my point when I did this was not cold blooded. Birds are a weird partial warm blooded, but all the other ones are, and I think that's what I was going for. But there's always that thought saying, what about that kobold or Sarin who wants to be a reptile totem? So that's a weird thing that I just haven't done, but I do think about slipping those in, and those would just be a very easy couple of lines to add. But all the whole thing of befriending, calming, controlling, summoning, all that's the same. The metamorphosis is the same. I do explain it a little better. Um, they explain it here, but I do think there is some parts of the explanation, at least for me, which were kind of ambiguous. So I kind of defined those a little more. Um, Paladin, I've explained a few times, along with Men of Arms, why I took them away, how I added them to the Crusader from Yinslaw Jungles. Basically, their combat training, their type of automatic parry is they if they parry, they may not spend an action to dodge afterwards unless they use a shield. So they get an automatic parry like the cleric, but if they use a shield and fail to parry with the shield, then they can do a action. They can spend an action to try to dodge. So like the cleric, but a little bit better when they use a shield because they're a little bit more martial. And over here, they'll get prayers and penance. They'll get the squire, harming touch, but then later they'll get those additional hit points and shock points and hit points and shock points again. A mental conditioning, which I think makes it so they can't be impervious to all possession and mind control, including charms, hypnosis, and illusions, which is a really big grant to them. The priest, again, paladin, clergy, priest, pretty much straight out of here. The differences are the slight adjustments to give something for each level. They get magic points. They do get a couple of hit points here, but a lot of their stuff is all their abilities. And whereas in here, light and dark did get separate abilities, but some of them got it, say, like level 4, and the other one would get it at level 5. I kind of try to keep them straight. So, like here, resurrection, sense supernatural evil. Um, I might have had some here like animate command dead, priest of darkness only, and instead of that, priest of light would get something else, gain Grants of Strength, Priests of Light would be, at an equivalent type level. Intervention. So kind of like Darkness is getting 3, then Light's getting 3 at the same level for a little more balance in that way. And the Servitor, I've said, is my replacement for the Warlock, which is the Elementalist. There's servants, servitors of the Elemental Lords. Same thing, if you have these requirements, you're 1. If you have better requirements, you can choose 2 elements. Basically, it just splits your spells instead of 2 spells per level. For your 1 element, you get 1 spell for each of your element at each level. Additional hit points, some additional shock points, some additional magic points increase the rate. All of those things like Sense Elemental, Speak Elements, non-aggression, all of that's given here at first level. And basically all of their things, even the Ritual of Summon Elementals, is something that they get at first level, but they only get a 5% chance. So you probably want to get higher before you attempt that. And then the optional, the commoner, is something I intentionally changed from like the peasant. I wanted, because in here, let's go to the look at the occupational character classes. If you look here, even the peasant needs a physical prowess of 7. Every single one of these requires a attribute of a certain. The very lowest is the witch, which is a 5 IQ and an evil alignment. The next one is, I want to say, the priest. Well, priest, usually you need something of a 7. Priest IQ of 7, peasant PP of 7, a mercenary fighter PS of 7, that type of 7 being the lowest. But what happens when you roll a character that doesn't have that? Do you let them roll a new character? What if that was the only thing that was a 7? Do you force them to be? So I came up with taking that peasant optional occupational character class and turning it into the commoner occupation. Their thing is they choose 1 secondary skill as a profession and they get a plus 50% bonus to it. That is their thing. Like I talked about before, it could be a smith, a baker, a herbalist, whatever that secondary skill is, that is their thing. This is the only occupation that will give bonuses to an attribute. So whereas I believe even 3rd edition, D&D, 4th edition, 5th edition, every so often you get a bonus like a +1 to an attribute. Palladium never had anything like that. In later books, they gave bonuses to physical attributes through physical type skills and training. I wanted to not have that at all, so I kept that out of Palladium First Edition, but I did want somebody to have a choice if they rolled really bad or if they just missed say they really wanted to be a paladin, didn't want to be a knight because I've separated them, and they really wanted to be a paladin, but they missed that by 1 point. Then you choose the commoner. And if you look here at 2nd level, they gain 1 point to 1 attribute. They could bump that point up, and then they could use that switching occupation rules to become the paladin. And that is such a trope in fantasy of that commoner, that farmer, that shepherd, that baker who becomes somebody, who becomes a hero, who becomes a knight, a paladin, a wizard, whatever, becomes better. So many books, novels, fantasy novels are like that, and I wanted to have that. So you have to start as a commoner. It's kind of like an Intuit, where you cannot go into the commoner. You start as a commoner, but you can stay there as much as you want. And if you look at here, you get 1 at level 2, 1 at level 5, 1 at level 9, 14, 15. So if you really stayed with it, you could get up to 5 additional attributes. But by 5, if you're only 2 points off somewhere, you could then switch over, be a little better, and then switch over. So that is what this occupation is for those who either roll so low they can't be anything. They can be this, and they can have a skill, and they can contribute, and they can do things. Or if you roll decent enough but not quite what you wanted, you could be a commoner and boost that up. So that's the commoner. The merchant is straight from here. They get some additional hit points and shock points, some skills, plus 5% to bartering because they're merchants. So why not? Another plus 5% in bartering because why not? Um, that's kind of what the merchant is. And then, like I said, the naturalist is kind of that mountain man, trapper, outdoor person who stays out there, but not the super in tune with nature that you get druid abilities later. Ranger, they do get a +2 physical conditioning. The other one, like the merchants, don't get anything, but the or commoner is kind of a physical laborer, so they get a +4. That's another nice bonus that a lot of these don't get. Servitors being infused with elemental get 2, but a lot of the other ones don't. Um, but the naturalist is going to get some hit points, and they're going to get some additions to wilderness survival because they are living off the land and things like that. The noble is not going to get any physical conditioning tier 3. This again is the, if your background, because a lot of people like of being the noble of noble blood, then this is the character class. If you do not be this occupation, then you're basically a nope. You gotta commit if that's what you want. So we'll go ahead and end here for this part. Thank you again for watching this, but this is the reasons of the occupations that I kept, which ones I discarded, which were the witch hunter and the undead hunter, which ones I combined, paladin, crusader, the monk, scholar, the mercenary sailor type things, um, where I got some of the ideas from other Palladium books and different things, giving everybody a something at every level, even if it's just a couple of hit points or shock points, but giving everything to have something to look forward to. So there weren't those dead levels of not getting anything at all. There's going to be something that everybody gets at every level. So go ahead and end that here. Hopefully you like this. Hit the like, hit the dislike, hit subscribe. If you haven't, I thank all my subscribers for sticking with me. We'll get more into this Palladium deep dive next time with skills, and it will just be skills. I won't try to do anything past skills. And I will definitely be posting very soon the last adventure that we did. Some of the people were new characters and some old characters, so the campaign being the setting of Fallcrest in the Nintair Vale with players having multiple characters has fully taken effect, and we'll see how, or you'll be able to see how that works in the actual gameplay that we did. So I will be posting that soon as well. Other than that, once again, I am Lee McCrafton Jr., aka Zorbalchan Less Than Guru, and until next time, I'll catch you later.